Okay, perfect. So glad you're all here. For those who don't know me yet, I am Lucy Hunt. I'm the membership and editorial manager here at D&D. So you probably get a lot of emails from me, hopefully good ones. And I'm so excited to be here with you today about a conversation that is super important to me as someone invested in our team and culture behind the scenes. I'm sure to you as well, particularly if you're thinking about how to build a culture that truly lives and breathes inside your organization. Today, we're joined by the amazing Lisa Friscia, founder and president of Franca Consulting, former chief people officer and people strategy expert, who has helped mission-driven teams align how they hire, lead, grow, and grow with the values that they care most about. Lisa's going to bring a grounded, deeply practical lens to culture work rather than treating culture as something fluffy or performative. She helps leaders operationalize their values so they can actually show up in decisions, meetings, feedbacks, and systems. In this session, we'll talk about what it really takes to build a values-driven culture beyond what we often hear about with happy hours, Slack shoutouts, pizza parties, posters on the wall. So if you've ever sensed a gap between what your organization says it values and how work actually happens, this is the right place. Whether you're a founder, team lead, people or culture builder, you will leave with thoughtful reflection, concrete tools, and a clear way to translate your values into observational behaviors you can actually use in your team. Lisa, you can kick us off. We're so thrilled to have you.
Awesome. Thanks, everybody. So as I'm getting all of the decks ready to go, just a little bit of context for me. So I am a former middle school teacher and I started a high school as a high school principal. And so in that startup phase, not a lot of time for philosophy. Everything had to translate, and that definitely impacted the way in which I view talent and culture. And if you're into astrology, I always joke like this is very much my Aquarius Sun Virgo rising, right? Like the values, but then there's got to be a system. There's got to be an operationalizing to it. And so I will keep an eye on the chat. We are a small enough group that if there is a question, like if chat's comfortable for you and that's what's accessible, but also feel free to come off of mute as well, and we'll get started. So we're going to talk through, and I said 40 minutes because we want time for conversation, but we're going to talk through anchoring your value, defining your culture, asking why, translating that to observable behavior, and then we'll get into embedding it into your actual work and what does it look like to scale. And so I'm really curious just to see who's in the group so I can tailor what I'm talking about. If you could just drop in the chat if you are a solopreneur, if you are scaling, if you just got started, but you are looking to grow. If you could just drop in the chat where in this journey you are. I know some of us help people to do this. Oh, awesome. We're community builders. Another solopreneur. Yeah. Yes. All right. Perfect. So we'll get started. So the idea right now is that I want this to be practical, and I appreciate people are solopreneurs. So if you want to think of a client right now as the anchor, or an old organization, if you want to just process something that happened, that might be helpful as we go through this. So the first thing we want to do is talk about like what exactly is the value we're looking at, right? We have lots of organizations have beautiful values written on their website, beautiful pictures that mirror that, and nowhere in the culture do you actually see evidence of it. And it's not because people go, I mean, some people might. Most people that I have seen do not intend to be performative. They actually live those values themselves. But when it comes time to growing an organization, that encourages and reinforces those behaviors, that's where I've seen the breakdown. And so, first thing we want to do is really think about what's the value that we care about. And so, you know, just going back to this tagline for a second, what's the value that made you go out on your own? And so it's not the one on your website, it's not the one that made you go out on your own or the one you, but it's the one that you'd walk away from a client or an employee over. Like this is your bottom line. So if everyone can just take say 45 seconds. You won't get graded on it. You can change it at some point. But if you can just drop into the chat of what's the value you want to work through. Autonomy. Yep, that's a big one. Growth. Oh, that's a good one. Vulnerability. Great. So now that you have that value in your head, we're going to go through and start to really work through it together. So the first thing we want to do is define culture because culture, there is going to be a culture in your organization and in your team. The question is just whether you are driving the definition of that and encouraging it or if someone else is. And in the presence of white space, people will fill it in with whatever else they want to fill in. And so thinking through how do we define it so that other people know how to do it? And it's what culture is what you repeatedly enforce. So, three areas that I want you to think about. Culture is a pattern of behavior reinforced over time. That's all it is. It's how we do our work, and we see it in what gets rewarded, what gets tolerated, and what gets corrected. On the what gets rewarded, really, really look at places to look at your job descriptions, your performance evaluations, how bonuses are paid out. Thinking through those things, those documents need to have a through line to your values. Right? We've seen organizations that want to be collaborative, but their sales team gets individual bonuses based on revenue that come in. Or if you want collaboration, all of the goals are very siloed goals, right? And that's a common thing, right? This is not about being good or bad. It's just these are things that naturally happen and you have to fight against them. But to reward them, they also need to be clear and objective and something that can be measured as well. Otherwise, we have inequity, right? The person who's closest to us or the person who shares our identity or all of these other biases can creep in. Look at also what gets tolerated and then what gets corrected. I'd also say what gets praised as well. If you're always praising the person who gives 110%, which is not mathematically possible, or the person who always stays late to do stuff, you want to think about how you are actually unintentionally valuing something that maybe you don't exactly intend to. And so your values only culture if it changes or reinforces behavior. So I want you to start thinking about for vulnerability, even for yourself, like you can create your own operating system because sometimes it's like that Mindy Kaling quote in The Office, like, yeah, I work for myself, but I'm very hard to manage. So think about your own operating system as well. Um, sorry, I'm just going to move something here. All right. Otherwise, it's just going to be branding, right? Very pretty website. So then, and you can do 5 whys too, but I will start with 3 whys. You want to push past the pretty word and you want to push past the jargon, right? Because vulnerability, collaboration, growth, all of these things can mean different things to different people just because of our lived experiences. And so I'll give you a minute to think through these 3 questions for yourself, whether you're doing it for yourself or for a team you're working with. But asking, why does this value matter in your work specifically? Get granular. What is the problem protecting you from? Is it protecting you from scope creep or wrong clients or burning out? And then what happens inside of you? Like, how do you feel when it's violated? Do you get resentful? Do you start losing sleep? Um, so why don't we give a minute and a half for you to just reflect? And I think I have something. Let me see if I can get it quickly. But reflect on your own and feel free to share anything you'd like to share in the chat. And if you're new to the call, we've everyone has identified a value for either your organization or one you're working with. And now we're just thinking about why that value actually matters to you specifically. There's no wrong or right answers. All right, start wrapping up. And there's a worksheet I'll send out. I'm not able to attach it to the meeting chat, but I'll send it out so you'll have the slides and what have you. I know this is not enough time to actually do this activity deeply. Um, but the reason we do this is if your value isn't protecting against something, it's just decorative, right? Because we need to understand what it actually is doing for us to remember why it's important at 2 a.m. or when we're walking away from a client. And so I'm not asking you to share your I mean, you can share your reflection, but I appreciate everyone might be in a different space. But I'd love to know what sharpened for you when you started to push deeper. Like what might have come up when you actually started to reflect. And you can come off of mute or a small enough group or drop it in the chat, depending on your comfort. Mm-hmm. 100%. Sometimes our bodies know it before our minds and our souls do. Anything else that sharpened for folks or light bulb moments that came up?
Mm.
Yeah, definitely. Right? We can have, when you say it with a long memory, do you mean that if you don't mind me asking, do you mean that you started to change your behavior because you were irritated or like, oh, I need to operate differently because of this?
So for me, like the culture that I try to foment, right, and build is one of honesty, transparency, authenticity, right? So when that's not given back to me,
Hmm.
I can get frustrated, irritated, angry, whatever. Like I build a culture for me that when I say something, it's not just BS. Like when I worked in Chase, JP Morgan Chase and Roku, like I would say things, it's like coming from here
Yeah.
and it's not coming to placate people. So like I've had one-on-ones where I'm sitting there crying with them as they're telling me their frustrations, right?
Hmm.
It's showing vulnerability and stuff like that. When I see people who are just duplicitous or inauthentic or not transparent or not honest
Yeah.
or working against people for their own benefit, I've got a really long memory, like hundreds of years long, and I will adjust how I treat you
Yeah.
once you show me who you are.
Hmm.
So I see that. I'm like, I know exactly, like you become a known quantity
Hmm.
and you get treated in a way that's very suited to the way you practice and live.
Yeah. No, I mean, people are gonna, that's part of why many of us, since there are so many people who are solopreneurs and started things, right? We wanted to be able to define our relationships with people, right? So does that, and that could mean you engage with that person. That can mean I've heard people use, excuse the language, the asshole tax on clients. There's lots of different choices. The only choice is right for you only know the right choice for you, but really being able to define that and to say what matters there. Right. All right, so here's where the rubber starts to hit the road, really starting to translate it into observable behaviors. Because we're all going to have a time where things get really busy or there's a deadline. And so if we don't have some things that are, I don't want to say black and white exactly, but a behavior that we can either say to ourselves, it is happening or not, that's where the vagueness can start to come in. That's where the creep starts to come in. And that's when we start to feel it in our bodies, our irritation, our frustration. If you can't see it, you can't enforce it. For those who are working with teams or growing teams, right? You have to tell people what you need from them, or they're not able to actually perform. Remember, everyone on this call, because you're a member of Dreamers and Doers, I feel like it's safe to assume that you care about equity, diversity, and inclusion. Well, this is where the rubber hits the road. Because when we're not clear about what our expectations are, we privilege people who think like us and have our lived experience. That is not what anyone here wants to do, but that is the impact when we don't take the time to do this. I'll also name this is not easy. This is iterative. You also have to check yourself when you do this because our biases can creep up in the observable behaviors, but it is an important step. So, what does that actually look like? And this is where you start to see my Virgo rising. All right. So it's identifying the value, but also thinking about what is the behavior? What would somebody be doing? Or how I joke, what would a smart alien see? And that would tell them that this value lives within you and your organization. So for candor, right? We all want honesty and transparency. What does that mean? It might mean that feedback's given within 5 business days. You cannot sit on anything. The decision rule, which I like to call is like, what's the hill you're going to die on? Right? At the end of the day, we get things are messy. At the end of the day, what has to happen? And so the decision rule may be there is no surprise feedback in a formal review. Like it will not be okay if people are surprised. For ownership, it might be stakeholders are updated without being chased, right? It just becomes an automatic response that you're updating stakeholders. The decision rule may be if you don't know how to update them, then you need to escalate that to me as your boss within 48 hours. And so thinking through this, so you want to think through both the behaviors and the let's be real, we're living in a world with lots of different competing responsibilities and priorities, what actually needs to be true. JetBlue, well, I don't know if they still do this, but when my friend worked for JetBlue, they used to have in their employee handbook or their, for customer service folks, it was a long book, a handbook, but at the end of the day, it said, at the end of the day, if you don't know what to do, make the customer happy. That doesn't have to be yours, but it's sort of a how to clarify when there is going to be a lot of vagueness. And so the next step for you, draft an observable behavior for your value and then write one decision rule, aka what's the hill you're going to die on. At the end of the day, this is the thing that has to happen for you. And take a minute to do that. And when you're done, just drop it in the chat. Yeah, good question, Ashley. So, what does growth mean to you?
Growth means constant learning, trying new things, ultimately with the end goal of like meeting full potential,
Yep.
not leaving any in the tank.
Yeah. And so the behavior is trying new things even if I might fail. Awesome.
Mhm.
What if is this something that you like, is there a like a risk level that you have for yourself?
Not defined. There probably is.
So questions that might help you to think about it might be one, because I love learning too, and I've had to limit myself to KPIs per quarter. Like this is the thing I'm focusing on. So it could be
Hmm.
by subject, right? Growth in a specific area. Like
Mm.
that might be one way to frame it. It could be a like it could be a number, right? I must try at least one new thing. Is it a thing that scares you or is it a thing that mildly scares you? And either is fine. These are all just questions to think about. Like, would you do something that you know you're going to fail at? Or would you do things that there's a chance that you might fail? And
Mhm.
those are questions that might help you to think about what is the thing that needs to be true and by when, right? Is it a quarter? Is it a month? What's reasonable?
That's great. Thank you.
No problem. Yeah, think through time, think through like, what is a potential decision trigger, but all of those things can be a part of this. Curious what's coming up for folks too, because I appreciate sharing your exact behaviors and values requires some level of vulnerability, but I'm curious more about the process if you'd like to share. Like, what is this bringing up, or what is this causing you to realize?
I think for me, this is Rochelle. I think it's challenging to think about the decision
Hmm.
uh, based on that. It's easy to say the behavior, oh, I want to be able to have a growth mindset and be vulnerable, but then it's hard to, I guess, just put systematizing it. Maybe one time, I try something out of my roles and responsibilities once a quarter or something
Hmm.
like that.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I think, look, I mean, I think, and I would say this for, a nonprofit board that wants data versus, you. If you don't know where to start, what I would do is I would take a month of just being really reflective, maybe journaling every day. What has come up? What are you noticing? What are the trends? And then based on that data, you may be able to then pull out something from there. Like, oh, okay, this is what's actually happening here. So the awareness today might just be the first step.
Hey, Lisa.
Hey.
I wanna I think um I'm very similar. I had trouble when it was framed as like a decision rule, but when you mentioned a trigger, that was easier for me.
Okay.
So it's just like what don't I like? And sometimes that's how my values kind of pop up. So
Mhm.
I what my value was autonomy, right? Over
Yeah.
my time, who I work with, the work that I do. And I noticed that if I'm being, a client is trying to micromanage my work, or
Yep.
if they don't respect my calendar, right? Like those are the things like that definitely trigger like my autonomy being at risk. But on the flip
Mhm.
side, I thought about what are the good things that help me kind of affirm that
Yeah.
this is a value. And those are like when a client has a win, or I work with a lot of social impact organizations.
Right.
So when they have a win for the communities that they serve, and I can see like it may not be the direct outcome, but it's like, oh my gosh, because I coached these leaders, they were able to do this better and then get to this end result.
Hmm.
So thank you for saying trigger because that made it a little clearer for me. And then I
Yeah.
thought about, oh, but when it's going well,
Yeah.
what does that look like too? So this is
Yeah.
really helpful framework.
Great. Thank you. Yeah. And I mean, I work with social impact too. I know we've talked
Hmm.
about this. Um, respecting time and labor, not a strong point all the time. Love them to death. I've been in the work. And so, that may also ask you to think about, are there systems or how is my intake or my systems
Hmm.
potentially not necessarily contributing, but allowing those things to happen?
Mm,
You
that's
know,
good. Yep.
um, it's a constant constant conversation. I've been lucky that I've had a few fractional clients where I regularly check in with the person so that we can talk about here's how I'm spending my hours. I'm not going over my hours unless you pay me more, but I want to make sure I'm prioritizing the things you want to prioritize. So that's one way I've been able to sort of manage folks who are like, you can do this and you can do this. I'm like, I can do all of those things if you pay me. Now we want to think about embedding in your work. If you've read, now I'm blanking on it, Atomic Habits, you definitely know what we're going to talk about. But really thinking about James Clear wrote, I'm going to get this quote a little bit wrong, but we don't rise to the level of our values so much as we fall to the level of our systems. And so if we don't have systems that are embedded either for ourselves, our teams, like it's just going to get deprioritized with all the things that we have to do. And so the real test is, does your value hold when things get hard? Or how does it give? And so these are just some questions to prompt you in thinking about this. So for client selection, this is where a lot of us are. What are questions that would reveal whether this client shares this value? And I love coming up with interview questions. It's like why I loved writing tests for students. So I'm always happy to bounce ideas off of for this, but really asking, what does this look like in practice? And I don't know if this is necessarily right for clients, but one question that I loved, if you are interviewing, we were interviewed. So I was on a board and we were being interviewed for a grant. So excuse me, for a renewal. And the charter authorizer asked us, tell me the last time the board disagreed. I was like, oh my God, that is such a good question. Because it really highlights, like, if no one's ever disagreeing, then you're not telling each other the truth. And if you can't talk about how you disagreed in a certain way, right, it could also speak to a different dysfunction. So think about those questions that you might ask your client. And then as you scale and start hiring folks, what's the interview question that you'd ask a new hire about this value? Same thing for feedback. Like, what would you push back on or walk away from? And as you scale, starting to think about what are the behaviors that you actively want to praise, correct, or flag in a team member. So every time I see this, I'm going to praise it. Meetings and decisions, again, what would the value change about how you run or show up to meetings? And then when speed, of course, always, and this value conflict, what's going to win? And it might be for now, it's this, and then we get back to it, right? There could, life is not perfect, but thinking through what happens there. And then, of course, decision making. When money or pressure conflicts with this values, what wins? Right? We were just talking about this before, right? When I have a client that could potentially violate some aspects of my autonomy, what am I going to do? Am I going to charge them more? Am I just going to walk away? Am I going to narrow, like, hey, I'll do a diagnostic? All of those things are tools in our toolbox. And then and then as you're scaling, thinking about what's the standing rule when this value is under pressure or scale. So when these two things conflict, we're always going to choose why. I know I'm using a lot of teacher examples, but I had worked with a principal who, when kids were misbehaving, the rule she gave her teachers was, if the choice is between giving the kid a consequence and escalating, oh, excuse me, walking away or escalating the situation, then you're always going to walk away. Like, I would rather you walk away and let a kid act a fool, and then we can deal with it later rather than dealing with it in the moment. And there was it's a very human way of approaching student behavior, but it's also such a black and white sort of rule for her teachers. And that's why she had a really warm culture in her schools. I'm gonna start looking at the chat a little bit more. Sorry. But yeah, definitely easier to think about a client, I think, for a lot of us too. As we're looking through this, curious, like questions that are coming up, or maybe some light bulb moments that you're having as you're looking through this. Sorry. We'll keep going. There'll be time for more discussion afterwards. And so as you're scaling, whether we're scaling or so many of us work with organizations that are scaling as well. But at 5 people, like under 5 people, your personality can really hold the culture. You can really, have all the difficult conversations, manage it. At 15 to 20, you start to see the cracks appear. And this is where, you see, I'm sure you've seen this in your clients. They see a lot of head nods, right? It's like something's off. Like, I don't know, like the amount of time I'm working, this is like, it's not translating. And then at 25 plus this people, you really have to have systems to do it alone. Because if you don't have these systems in place, what really happens, it's almost like having a leaky pipe, right? There's a lot of effort going in, but like, where is it going? Like the output is not equivalent or proportional to the input. So definitely not as much vibes, more clarity. And then starting to think about what gets tested as you grow, right? So growing your business doesn't dilute your values, but ignoring them does. And so these are just the pressure points. And so knowing that these things are going to happen, right, help us to be aware of it when it starts to happen, right? So the pressure points start to happen when maybe there's a new client who doesn't share it or doesn't share it in exactly the right way, or thinks that they're sharing it. My favorite, thinks that they're sharing it and really doesn't know that they're not. Or it could be the first hire who cuts corners or the big opportunity but misaligned terms. There's always revenue pressure in a slow quarter, and you're moving too fast to reinforce anything. And so um, part of the reason that we want to identify those things and reflect before they happen is because then we have some sort of operating system to default on, right? If you want to get very nerdy, those things happen, and if you don't have these things ingrained in you, you're reacting from your short-term memory, and really from your amygdala, which is like the very instinctual, like reptile part of our brain, which we'd like to probably minimize that. And so the more that you stop and reflect and say, oh, this is how I would have done it differently and do it again, the more it just gets ingrained in your long-term memory. So there's actual science behind all of this. It's not just, oh, this feels nice. Um, and the quiet erosion starts to happen. You're starting to say yes to the wrong people or the 50% right people, or oh, I'm just not going to have that feedback conversation today. I always love when people are like, I don't have time to have the feedback conversation. I'm like, no, you just don't want to have it. It's okay. We don't like to do things that are uncomfortable. It's fair. Or not naming it when it's crossed, or letting a workaround become the norm, or assuming everyone just knows. So thinking through like just knowing that these things are going to happen at some point, and just have a sense of what you're going to do. Okay. And so for you, thinking through what's one behavior you're going to clarify or say no to this week. And so I love having people make commitments to themselves before we leave.
I love that. What you're going to say no to, because you can't be everything to everyone, and that's about the prioritization of Lisa. So love it. Yeah.
Our values are so much about, like, we cannot keep saying yes to things without saying no to some things.
Yeah.
And so figuring out what those things are um, is just as important, if not more important. So does have anyone want to share a behavior that they're either clarifying or saying no to? Yes.
Just saying no to a meeting that I don't know if I'll get any benefit from the networking meeting. If I'm not sure there's a decisive way of us working together.
Yep. I love that. Any other things that folks want to say yes or no to in the next week?
I mean, I think that was pretty spot on, though. I mean, like, there's some things I get invited to that I'm like, yeah, not really. Pass.
Yep.
So using, I think that discernment is like continuing with discernment,
Yeah.
and what feeds me as opposed to what drains me.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm going into a conference next week. And so I feel like I need to say, like, there's so many things you want to say yes to, especially when you're paying your own way through your conference. Um, but I think I need to spend some time on Friday thinking through what am I going to say no to so that I can get my introvert break at some point.
I'm just realizing that my client intake is all about them, so I understand them. And I'm going to look at that and see what questions I need to add to ensure that the clients align with my values. I
Love
haven't
that.
I haven't
I
done
love
that.
that. I'd love to see what you come up with when you're done. And it could also be, the nature of the project that they want. A lot of times people, like I love doing leadership enablement and training, um, but it is hard to do it when I realize that people don't have the systems to support the behavior change that they want. And so it's like, I can lead this 20K 5 session training, but I don't think this is going to have I don't know if this is going to have the input you think it's going to have. All right. So we'll get some questions and answers in a second. But again, remembering that culture isn't a vibe, it's a reinforcement system. And it's not just what you believe, but it's what you're reinforcing. So thinking through what you're clarifying and saying no to. And that can even be a weekly prompt for yourself as well. Some things about me. Because I work with a lot of social impact organizations, I do fractional work and what have you. But I have also found that shorter is better sometimes, because things are just moving so fast. And so there's different ways to engagement with me, whether it's a strategic clarity intensive, which is just 90 minutes, like let's get to the heart of the issue. Diagnostics usually take about a month. Sprints about 4 to 6 weeks. I joke with clients, I can go fast. Can you go fast? And like being honest about that. And then facilitation as well, especially when organizations are growing. That first C-level team, who sometimes it's their first C-level job or the first VPs in an organization, that's when you start to see culture breakdown. And so I come in and facilitate those groups. And then I appreciate this is not for you guys, but if you know anyone, I have found that performance reviews go very badly in a lot of organizations because they either treat it as a compliance activity or they get so into the emotional intelligence portion of it that managers are saying wild things. And I think, and both need to happen. And so I'm running a train the trainer for the person who has to make sure that everyone gets their performance reviews done, whether it's the chief of staff, whether it's the head of HR that, before was just running payroll and now they're in charge of this. They'll walk away with an actual deck and facilitation guide on how to do both, how to make sure your managers don't say crazy, wild things, but also are a human and have a conversation and don't piss people off. People forget that having strong relationships with your team is a legal mitigation risk because people forget that all the time. And then for newer people managers and project managers, I lead a 3-week intensive on leading with clarity. So basically, what we just did, we do a version of that, starting with yourself, team roles, feedback, and leading with influence. And so that's a quick. All right, I will stop sharing. All right. That's all I got, but would love to have build some space in to hear what folks are thinking, any realizations. I know that you're also bringing your own brilliance and wisdom to the room as well. So anything else that you'd like to share for the group, we'd love to hear.
I had a quick question. I'm building a community for women in tech. Would you say instilling a culture within a community, is it similar or how does it vary in a company?
I I'm gonna pass this off to Lucy in a second, but she'll have a lot of answers. But I was facilitating a conversation just on this in terms of like building belonging, and Mallory Contois, who does OGC, someone else who runs a community, she's a head of growth, really talking about behaviors for your community members and making sure that they're reinforced. So whether that is writing in the right channel or the first time someone says something that's a little out of pocket, right? Because that'll happen, especially in writing, if there's like a written component. Like, how are you going to handle it when that first person does that? So I think definitely starting to identify that. And that also, I mean, think about dreamers and doers or a community you're a part of, right? It was very clear on the front end what we were signing up for, and that attracted the right people, but it also kept out the people who wouldn't have been aligned as well. But Lucy, I don't know if you have any, you work you work in a community, so I'm sure you have a lot of insights.
I would just say, yeah, like it's something like you said, Lisa, things are iterative, but having values is important important to have like a framework for setting a culture of how people kind of it helps people know what to expect, like how we set it very clearly in Dreamers and Doers of what we intend to have, like even in our welcome call we set expectations around what we love here, what we don't allow here, and regularly have moments behind the scenes where there are nudges to members of like, hey, I love what you're doing here. This maybe would have been a way that we can encourage you to share it a little differently. Um, and just giving guidance really based on values to make sure that the culture stays how it's been dreamed of, how what's been what people come here for, that it stays aligned. Yeah.
Thank you, Lucy.
Yeah, thank you.
And Rochelle, I managed and coached for a couple of women in tech orgs. So if you want to connect one-on-one to talk, we can do that. Yeah.
Thanks so much. Is it Lakeisha? Am I saying it
Yes.
right?
Yes, you
Perfect.
are. Thanks for asking. I always appreciate people asking.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
Amazing. Thank you, Lisa, for
Lisa, this was
everything.
good.
Thank you. I'm glad.
Yeah, it's really good.
I'll send you guys, or maybe I'll put it in
Yeah.
the chat, the worksheet. Another time saver. If you put your deck into Claude and say, "Hey, make a branded worksheet," it's amazing. So have fun.
Oh, wow. That's a great idea. Yeah. Well, we'd love to, shower you with gratitude. Thank you for your time. And also, we will be sending the recording out of this so you can listen again. And with that, Lisa, I'm happy to share slides and
Yeah, I'll send it.
um, template as well. So I can have it, but if you attach it here and yeah, we have like if anybody has more pressing thoughts too. I know there was a lot of deep thinking going on in here about values and how they apply to the culture we're building in our own businesses and in businesses we work with.
I'd say this really, like, you really got me reeling right now. So, but in a good way. I think there's so much going on um in I'm in DC, so there's that. But and I work in social impact. So there's a lot going on with the work I do and the balance of, when to walk away or like, because when it's impact driven, it's like you want to do the work, but also I have bills to pay. Right. And also, I don't want to get stressed out because I have to take care of my person. Right. So it's always this balancing act. And you just really, like, I'm at a point where I'm trying to figure out what does my work look like in this moment? Like, how will I meet this moment for however long, right? Before I have to pivot again.
Mhm.
So this was very helpful. And I love the framework. So I'm definitely going to use that to kind of figure out, like, to hold myself accountable. Right. So if I say this is a value of mine, how is it showing up daily in how I move, right, personally, but also in how I interact with my clients. So this was really good.
Great. I'm glad it was so helpful.
Yeah. Yeah.
Thank
Yeah, I always say like values, if someone says they like something, show me how you spend your time and your money, and then I'll show
Mhm.
you what you value.
Mhm.
Yep.
Yeah.
I always say that it shows up for organizations. They say your values show up in your calendar, your budget, and your performance review. If I don't see them there,
Mm,
it doesn't exist.
it's
Oh, I
true.
love that. Yeah, write that down. Uh,
Yeah, the culture is so based on values is something I'm definitely obviously like it's one of those things you're like, duh, but it just like that we made it so foundational to where we start to thinking about culture. So
Well, so
yeah.
often we think about culture as like the pizza party or it's like an add-on, right? And
right.
so then it's the first thing to go when things get stressed out, as opposed to how do we build it into the operating system because it is going to get stressed at some point. Um, and so I think that's where the disconnect for folks
Hmm.
happens.
Yeah. Well, amazing. Again,
Awesome.
we in the chat here you can find I've shared Lisa, I shared your profile on the community. You can share feedback about today's event, see what else is going on, and you can fill out a form if you're like, I am also want to see if I should run an event here too. This is sparks inspiration. So thank you all for being here and for jumping in and participating. Thank you, Lisa, for your time. And I wish you guys all a beautiful rest of the week and weekend. And
Thanks,
how
Lucy,
all
for
of your summer dreams come true. Of
Sounds
Thanks for
good.
facilitating, Lucy.
course.
Bye,
Talk
everyone.
soon.
Thank you.
Bye.
Everyone.